Okay, Ben, it's great to talk to you about your contribution to the Future Work Forum report on the future of middle management. If I remember correctly, in your chapter, you were focusing on the role that middle managers play in kind of meaningful connections between the team, with extended teams in particular in the organization of the future. Perhaps you can explain a bit about the kind of problems that you think middle managers are going to be facing in the future, particularly in the context of meaningful connections, and what the possible solutions might be.
Sure. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I wrote the article really in response to this not exactly crisis, but the huge pressure that middle managers are under. They've often been under pressure as organizations have delayered, they've removed those supervisory or middle management roles and narrowed out the middle, hollowed out the middle of the workforce. And so the few remaining find themselves under intense pressure to do much, much more, probably at a point in their life where they may have substantial additional responsibilities. They may have young children, they may have elder dependent care outside of work, they may be in the demographic that's not digitally native. They've had to acquire their skills on the go with various training and development or a personal investment that they've made, and depending on various circumstances and where they're based, of course, and the kind of organization they're in. And these things conspire in a way, or come together to act against them in their efforts to do really great work. And if we factor in the complexity of work now in this digital environment, with AI arriving, transforming so many business processes, they really feel that they've got their work cut out. They're often expected to be in some way technical specialists, delivering or executing tasks or managing projects, but they also have this responsibility to supervise those underneath, or those reporting into them. So all in all, it's a real challenge for them, I think, and the evidence bears that out, whether that's in the public sector or in the non-profit sector where I work a lot, or in the private sector. And what I really wanted to explore, and what I think is really a moment of real truth and a testing moment for middle managers, is reconnecting with their role as part of the human fabric of an organization. Now, this is very, very hard with remote structures and distributed workforces, but their role in connecting other people, other workers in their teams, in bringing a sense of cohesion or alignment into the workforce, and that may end up as consistency as well. But this kind of whole area of coherence and consistency as an organization, a company, a non-profit organization works towards its goals. There's a lot on the shoulders of middle managers. So what I wanted to explore was that tension of, like, it's a really difficult context. We know things are rapidly changing. They've got multiple responsibilities. How do they bring to life the responsibilities around connection, cohesion, coherence?
Yeah, just on the connection piece, you say that they need to be more digitally aware of the technology, and there's a kind of AI and so on as an additional layer of burden. Could that not also be an additional layer of relief, because some of the communications that they have been doing traditionally in the past, passing messages up and down the hierarchy, for example, are done better by, or equally as well, by technology? And so some of their traditional burden actually gets taken away with AI, except they may different sorts of burdens come along as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, it's interesting because a lot has happened since I wrote, and since we had our discussion on middle managers as well. Such is the pace of change, and it's certainly true. And I'm working with middle managers who have outsourced some of their communication to their AI agent of choice to manage their diary or to communicate up or down. And I think a few weeks ago, I was reading about Meta's work to create AI version of Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know whether that's proceeded any further or not, but the implication was that staff, there wasn't enough of him as one person, and obviously, the middle managers were, people wanted to bypass those, or there were fewer of those, and have access to the top, right? But there's not enough time or bandwidth, so an AI version would be able to respond, and the inference was that that would be satisfactory or pleasing to those wanting to interact. I'm not personally convinced that that would be the case, and I think, sometimes we put ourselves in the shoes of staff who want feedback, affirmation, appreciation. They want, certainly in the organisations and the level I'm working at, there's a lot of meaningful work. So I don't quite know. I didn't really explore how this would play out in industrial contexts or manufacturing or large companies with workforce focused on manual labour, working with people and robots. I suppose I didn't really get into that. I was really thinking about it in the context of more services type industry. I think some can be outsourced is the short of it, but what the research that the limited research that I've done with the clients that I'm working with is that people really do want to be able to get a hold of their supervisor or manager, and they want a human touch.
Yeah, I think, but there, you talk about manufacturing and robots and so on. I think some parallels between what was done to the manufacturing sector in the 50s, 60s, 70s when robots first started to come in. Human tasks were taken away or replaced by robots, sometimes to the benefit of the humans because they stopped doing the robotic repetitive work and they got to do slightly more interesting things if they weren't made redundant. And in fact, there's quite a bit, as you know, work done with people like Volvo and getting people to work in teams and enhancing the processes on the production line so it wasn't so repetitive. And I think AI is now, there's a good parallel with that. That's now automating some of the knowledge management processes in the office. And hopefully that frees up work to be done, more human work to be done by individuals. Although then, of course, that gives the middle managers more responsibility for managing the humans and less for managing the tasks.
Right, and some pressure on their people management skills as well to be able to bring together groups. I'm of an age where I remember doing my masters when I was sort of getting into HR and OD years ago, and we looked at Revens and action learning from the National Coal Board in the 1960s in the UK, and it was sort of case study material, and it was really interesting in that industry, the value in bringing middle managers together in real time to share and exchange, and we're still working on how best to do that now, and we have technology that can support sort of remote engagement much as we're talking today in different parts of the country. But I think that skill and is it is very unevenly distributed, let's say, in organizations, but where managers are able to bring together their teams, facilitate dialogue and create space for reflection and thinking and connection, then the evidence, certainly what I see, is that really, it's a good thing. It has a direct map and influence on engagement overall and on performance and contribution as well. So one of the things I write about is this issue of availability and accessibility of middle managers, which you can see in the coaching portfolio that I have. It's really important for managers to be somehow visible, available, not in wall-to-wall or morning to night meetings, but and if they're in person, many managers do, they are co-located with their teams, many middle managers are, but to not be tucked away behind a closed door or on the 7th floor or the 15th floor or wherever they may be, but actually to be out there is a really powerful way of them being able to make those meaningful connections with their workers and hear what's going on.
But that's assuming that meaningful connections tend to be face to face. Now, maybe you're too old. I don't know. Looking at, is this a generational thing? The middle managers of today, essentially didn't really come up with the kind of social media technologies that today's younger workforce do. The kind of the generation that made people they call friends on Facebook or other platforms. And yes, of course, they probably enjoy face-to-face contact, social contact with people down the pub or whatever, but who have a different relationship online than people who are not digital natives. And is it therefore, do you think there's a possibility of middle managers relearning from the next generation about how to communicate in a human fashion without it always having to be face to face? Yes, given the constraints.
There's a huge responsibility on middle managers to keep learning and to really engage with these new platforms, new communication channels, and that's a whole other area, really. That it's not like, that certainly I meet many who have taken their foot off the gas, let's say, or they've taken their eye off this issue and are wondering why they've got communication challenges or there's a disruption. And equally, picking up a phone for a phone call is it's a generation that doesn't do phone calls in quite the same way, and if you do call, you're likely to be ignored, or your call's going to be screened and you'll get a message back on a, whether that's a WhatsApp or some other messaging platform. Others are available, right? But the challenge for middle managers, is really engaging with, going beyond that period that we had probably a decade or so ago, where some treated email as that instant messenger, and they were exasperated when emails weren't responded to, and really looking at, okay, we saw Slack arrive, still around for some, but the Teams platform, so instant messaging and asynchronous messaging through other platforms is a really important skill to master. And I say it's a skill to master because the boundaries become very blurred with these types of channels, and not everyone has a work device. They may be on their personal device as well, and so it just gets very murky. So middle managers thinking about their boundaries as well is going to be, that's really important.
Because boundaries is something that you mentioned about middle managers being at a certain stage of life where they have other responsibilities. The boundaries between work and home have inevitably blurred a bit. COVID helped or hindered, depending which way you look at it with this. And yet we're now seeing quite a lot of managers insisting that their people come back to the office because somehow they've lost some of that personal contact. And I think I have mixed feelings about that. In some ways, that's good because they're recognizing face-to-face human contact as being important. On the other hand, they're reverting to old ways of working because they can't quite cope with doing it the new way, and they're imposing old ways of working on a workforce who've got used to new ways of working.
Yeah.
And do you see is that a bit of a generational gap?
There's an element of generational difference there, but a lot of nuance is required here. And if I think about organisations that I'm supporting across Western Central Africa or in the Middle East region or in South and Central Asia, it's not the case that everyone has somewhere decent to work from at home, regardless of the task may lend itself, but not everyone. That's a wealth factor, and it's also there's a gender and wider inclusion component there. And we know from research that we've done with one of our clients that that many working women, or in other words mothers particularly, needed the option to go back to work because of the dual burden essentially of childcare or running a home and then being expected to be a fully functioning executive but remotely. They need that space. Now there's a lot of nuance needed around the whole topic, I suppose. But blanket edicts, and we see what's in the media saying everyone come back. If I can't see you, you're not working, you're not delivering. It's more of the rage bait or the clickbait kind of headlines that get people up in arms, I would say. I think pretty well every organisation, every client, every non-profit client I'm working with is really working through carefully on job analysis and job design to understand what can be done remotely, what needs to be done in person, and how they address it.
Yeah. You work in this interesting world of UN agencies and
Yes.
voluntary organizations and so on, where particularly you're going across cultures, whether it's in Africa or Asia or
Mm.
wherever. Um, so the cultural element of work must play heavily here. You talk about the role of women as mothers,
Mm.
but presumably that varies distinctly from culture to culture as the role of women. And do you
It
see
is.
organizations adjusting to that or
Yeah,
struggling?
and I mean they certainly are, and it is cultural, but there are other really practical factors that we simply don't. They just don't and come on our radar here in the UK where I am and where you are. I think today it's so. Let's say the average temperature in the season outside is 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. You know, it's unbearably hot in homes without expensive air conditioning. If you factor in the war in the Middle East right now and the cost of energy, you know, you've got very real issues around people being able to afford to cool their house, and so they're going to a centralized. So there's a queue to go back to an office, if you like, where there's air conditioning and relative comfort to be able to do the work. So we've got a lot. I mean, it wouldn't really enter our heads here and at the level that we work at, but I think middle managers have got their work cut out trying to, it's not just a performance and delegation kind of challenge around, job design and task design and accountability. There are other really complex factors to take into account.
And so a good manager obviously understands the drivers, the motivations of their employees. And again, in a multicultural environment, that must be quite a challenge. And if you're now talking about organizations becoming less distinct, more networked, more spread out, presumably being able to manage the culture of an organization in the context of multicultural subsidiaries, divisions, parts of the organization, that must be, you work with these people, that must be a real
Yeah.
challenge.
There's a huge pressure on middle managers to in a way to upskill in areas that they maybe hadn't prioritized. So the diplomacy, the influence, being this buffer between they always had to act as a buffer probably between the most senior leadership and the front line, but being able to facilitate, to broker, to be that go-between, to maintain their role in strengthening trust and contributing to psychological safety is critical. And if they're not doing their job well, then there are issues around disengagement and disconnect become very real. And I think it's the case certainly in my coaching portfolio that some just simply, I don't know that they really thought about what they were signing up for when they accepted their promotion. It's still the case for many organizations that promotion through the ranks to become a more senior manager comes with line management responsibility. It's rare that there's a really well articulated dual path in terms of a technical specialism. It's usually through a line management route. So we're still grappling with, certainly within UN clients and in the non-government organization context, with organizations that have really struggled to deal with that. And so we've got the most, well, maybe that's a bit harsh, but let's say we've got less than adequately prepared or skilled individuals managing others in middle management roles, and it's not working out very well. So, and now with all the pressure that we talked about, they've got to upskill very quickly or figure out a different way of doing their work.
But besides having the benefit of your personal mentoring, coaching, etc., do you see that a number of those older middle managers, or indeed the senior professionals now being promoted into management for the first time, into people management, do you see that they innately have the skills and it's just a question of training, bring them out, or is there a real, I don't know, fundamental gap between the personalities and the experience of those people and what we're now requiring of them in this kind of more challenging people management environment? Are they essentially redundant because they're not going to make it, or are they developable enough to make it
The
through.
best examples I've got really are of organisations that have decided that they do have an obligation to invest in these individuals and to at least support them along the way. And many are capable of it, of course. And we're not the intercultural component is complicating, let's say, because it brings in a lot of extra layers. But I think many can do it. There's a lot of accompaniment that's needed and a lot of careful support around and education. It actually here, some of it is about knowledge as well as skill. I've seen some really excellent examples of middle managers working with colleagues to run excellent consultation processes using technological platforms, using different mechanisms. Even this week I've been working with a Thai-based organisation. So they're in Bangkok, but they've got staff distributed. Some are in the office, some are not, and really useful consultation approach in an all staff with various channels for communication, both in the sort of the meeting mechanism and then through Mentimeter and other opportunities for input and back and forth. And they require some management. It doesn't really matter who, but it is, some of these things are bringing teams together. And I think, for me, I can see there the vital role of middle managers in creating multiple channels for participation and giving voice to the many.
Yeah, there are, of course, modern channels, WhatsApp and the ones you've just mentioned as ways of communicating. They're also our fellow partner of the Future Work Forum, Patrick, for example, has a way of, it sounds mechanical, but a way of using an app to get people to sit and talk to each other and share things in what seems like a rather forced way, but it is focusing on the human aspects of communication as well as just the pure content of meetings, and adding a personal element to what can sometimes be very impersonal digital communications. Do you see a possibility of there being a bit of technology that actually helps the traditional middle manager to become more human?
Absolutely, yeah, unequivocally, yes. And I love the work that Patrick's been doing. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea initially, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. But we worked together with the Warm Space method and app in its very early beginnings in 2023 with a large group, and saw its power and potential. It did not engage every single individual that we are working with in this on-site testing period, but the variation of a process where you mix randomly individuals in the workforce with other individuals and give them a framework to exchange and connect. There's a real element of serendipity and randomness that is very energizing, and it's something that in my work, in our work at the Conscious Project, it's something that we've been doing for the last, more than a decade, is facilitating those moments of exchange for conscious encounter, if you like, and connection. And Patrick's and the team's app and mechanism is good. I've just finished actually some facilitator training to be able to run it. But whether it's that or some adapted version of checking in, creating the human connection at the beginning or at key moments, it's exponentially powerful and has a very positive impact. So it needs a little bit of contextualization, is what I've experienced, but that human connection, and again, in this teaching, in a way, middle managers and building their confidence to be able to see that time that they might take for a check-in round, as it might take 10 minutes at the beginning of a meeting. So it's seen as a cost, but to see it as an investment and then to stay with it and then see the results is really worth doing. A team I've been working with across Nigeria in a UN agency, I've been working with them February, March, April. Quite a significant shift in mindset and approach as a result of what we did, which included resetting some of the human relationships and working with the supervisors and line managers, as well as the head of this business unit. Quite a small one, probably only 50 people or so across the country, but really, really powerful. So yeah, I think middle management's got a really important role to play in that, and they maybe weren't thinking that. In the old days, maybe it was taken for granted. You'd all have coffee or tea together in the morning, or you'd go out to the pub in this country after work. But I mean, these things they don't quite play out like that as consistently. So I see huge potential in the bringing together of technology and those facilitation skill, those people skills to create some of that connection and cohesion that I was talking about earlier.
Do you also see a move towards the empowerment of the front line? So genuinely, we talk about empowerment all the time as a kind of nice HR word, but the genuine delegation of decision making to people at the front line. There are one or two well-documented examples of self-managed teams and people like that where there's been some genuine delegation, often because it's been an inspired founder of a company that has sets it up under those principles. Quite difficult probably for an existing organization to do. But do you see that influencing the role of middle managers, where partly because of the overload we've been talking about in terms of communications, etc., that they either willingly or slightly under duress genuinely delegate, genuinely empower people and genuinely trust them more? You mentioned trust earlier.
It's a really important point. I mean, I think yes, potentially, but I don't see it as being here and widely occurring. That we're just not there yet. It's very messy right now. What's more common is a great intent is set, so the desire to be like that. A consultation process is launched. There's all sorts of technology to support that, and then it starts getting drawn out. It starts getting complicated. Not enough consideration paid to where the decisional authority sits, or the mechanism, or the process of decision making, and then we see a flip-flop from consultation, participation, engagement. It's great at one level, and then taken too long, haven't got the clarity, no one can agree, so then we go back to a really directive driving style which contributes to disengagement, or like this sense of, well, that was a bit of a tokenistic or pointless process. I thought we had autonomy and agency, but it turns out the executive order way is the is the way it's being done. So I see a lot of that in this messiness now. And
but do you see there's a generation coming through who expect more responsibility? I mean, you get the youngster, you relatively bright, so you graduate, say, who wants immediately to be a manager of something, if they don't want to be a social media influencer or whatever the career is they want to have, and that traditional roles, particularly in hierarchical organizations, are just not going to meet the needs, the expectations that the younger generation have.
It's very mixed, and I think the data is painting a very complex picture, actually. So there's certainly lots of caricature, and there's certainly I still do quite a lot of youth work in that 18 to 24 year demographic, and there's definitely some unrealistic expectations of the world that I see and live and work in, around how quickly promotion will happen, how much money they'll be able to make, and how much autonomy they'll be able to have. So I do, that is clearly an issue. What's interesting in my work with UNICEF at the moment, they have a very clearly defined younger worker category of those under 35, and they've got some really interesting data from that demographic. And it's very clear that from the data, some work that I've been doing this year so far is really showing that there's a strong desire for in-person contact, for mentoring and supervision, for a much more structured approach to career development and growth. There's an acknowledgement that there's personal responsibility. There's a real desire for opportunity. It's not a demographic that's growing for the organisation either at the moment. So this is, it's reached the desk of the executive leadership in a way to really think about how an organisation pays attention to a really balanced demographic in terms of workforce, that it has sufficient younger workers as well as those that are in the middle and those that are very senior. So it's an aging workforce, in other words, right now. And there's one of the challenges that's contributing is that the nature of the work is becoming more complex and more senior as countries overall move from lower income to middle income or upper middle income, and health outcomes improve. The nature of the work being done by that particular UN agency, by UNICEF, shifts into the policy and influencing domain, which requires the wisdom of the years and quite a lot of experience and political savvy and clout and all the rest of it. And that's how the younger workforce acquires that, is mentored and guided through that. Will they hang around long enough to get that, or become disillusioned? These are really, really important issues. I'm a parent of a graduate who's actually got a job. I'm very proud and delighted, one of many graduates last year, of course, the COVID generation who missed a lot of exams and lockdown and have made it through university, entering the workplace. And it's been really eye-opening observing the recruitment process as a parent, but also as a former HR director and working a lot in recruitment. I mean, it's simultaneously terrifying and very disheartening, as well as, there are some employers out there who've understood the brief, if you like, and know what they've got to do. But yeah, I mean, that's a whole other area as well, but interesting.
Okay, but that's why we're probably out of time pretty well anyway. But that's a good point to end, I think, in terms of looking at the future for the younger generation. And this whole report about middle management has been kind of, where's it going in the future? So just in summary, would you say you're reasonably optimistic about there's a new middle management future coming and it's going to work in the end?
I think that middle managers who are agile, adaptive, and who can join these dots can see and anticipate the needs of a younger workforce and understand and are able to work with evolving technology and platforms and still be human. Yeah, there's work for them to do. Whether shareholders and the powers that be and executive leaders understand that, I don't know. I think we can but hope. But I think that, it's part of our job at the forum to put some of the data and evidence there to say that, in this evolving evolution, adaptation is needed in that cohort, and to demonstrate that the organizations that have got that, they provide a great inspiring example. So yeah, I think if a manager's listening, then then in a way they've got their next to-do list, or they've got affirmation if they're on the right path.
Well, that's good. Well, and so thank you very much for your contribution to some of those new ideas. No doubt the successful middle manager of the future will read what you've written, listen to your words of wisdom, and magically become the great change masters of the future.
Probably a lot of hard work for them involved, and hopefully, our collective work will inspire and give hope, as well as some really practical guidance and signals for them. So yeah, thanks very much.
Great conversation. Thanks, Ben.